Am I good? There we go. It was already on and I switched it off. Nice. To Nate's comments on offering, while chickens would be accepted, I was reminded by the youth group that we also would gladly accept a Nintendo Switch, which I have been told for the last 2 years of my job here, hey, buy a Switch already. And I go, hey, I got to pay rent. I'm going to start with that one. A tax write-off, maybe. I don't understand tax law. I'll talk to Paul Karen after. Good morning, University Church. My name is Joel. For those of you that may be visiting, I'm the Youth and Family Life Minister, so not the normal person up here speaking. Eric is out in New York City rocking it right now for his musical and getting some time off hanging out in New York City with Sharita. It's her birthday this weekend or tomorrow, I forget. So he gets a little break and the youth group gets to hear me twice in one day. So good for them. And as Hung shared, right, the main sermon today was the children's pageant, right? The gospel that was proclaimed today was what our kids did for you, right? The combining of two Christmas stories into this beautiful story that is titled, He Has Become Like Us So We Could Become Like Him. And if you look at the document, it's ... after. It's not a finished sentence. In the spirit of children and Christmas, I would like to ask you to reflect on this Advent season as another famous children's Christmas character. Not Santa, not Rudolph, not Frosty, but the Grinch. I would like you to do Christmas this year like the Grinch. Please don't, Carter, we need to be clear. I don't want you to steal people's gifts, okay? Please don't ruin your neighbor's Christmas. Don't treat your dog poorly, making it pull a sled, okay? Right, but the part of the Grinch story where we all feel a little warm inside, right? Not so cold and prickly. Where the Grinch's heart grows 3 what? Sizes, right? He takes from the Who's, he steals from the Who's. He thinks he ruins Christmas, but the Who's spirit of Christmas is not rooted in their trees, their decorations, their gifts. It's rooted in their community. It's rooted in the fact that they're together. And it's in seeing that spirit build through singing, which I will not do for you, don't worry, that the Grinch's heart grows 3 sizes. The Grinch gets his heart rocked by the people he tries to hurt. Maybe this Christmas, we could get our hearts rocked a little bit like the Grinch's. I've been thinking about Advent this entire semester. One of our members, Chris Duran, is doing some incredible work and research in the continual crisis that our climate continues to move in, right? And from a theological perspective as well as an ecological perspective, he's working with students at Pepperdine to create spaces for churches to learn more, to accept more, to grow more in our care for the world. And some of the students that Chris has in his class have met with Eric, Fallon, and myself, different groups, for a semester-long project. And the project was to create a 6-week series, teaching series, that was theologically informed as well as creation-minded, right, ecologically minded. And the focus was on climate refugees, people who are displaced because of climate disaster. And my group, we were talking about a 6-week series for youth groups, for teens, that would care for the climate as well as bring in deep, beautiful truths of Scripture. And so my mind jumped to Advent, because I think Advent has a lot to do with concern for climate refugees, because Advent has a lot to do with concern for others. We don't sing joy to me, the Lord has come. We sing joy to the world. Advent is a story that invites us to reflect on the wholeness of this place that we are right here and right now. The incarnation affirms the place that we are in right here and right now. I think we're called to see the Christ child in more places than just ourselves, or more places than just our churches this season. It's a season to prepare in our hearts room for this coming baby, this coming hope, this coming joy. In reflecting on Advent this year with these stellar students I got to work with, I noticed a lot more the differences in the Christmas stories. Have any of you ever reflected on the differences between Matthew and Luke's Christmas stories? You can raise your hand, I guess. We don't normally do that in church, but you can. I guess I should have stood over there if I was going to have people raise hands. But yeah, I don't think I've given it the full room it deserves, right? I think of the Christmas pageant that our kids put on, and we usually squish the stories together, which is fun and beautiful, right? I remember the days when a UFO was in the script. That's not in Matthew or Luke's story, but that's okay, right? But they're different, right? Matthew and Luke tell different Christmas stories. They're not the same, right? They both seem to agree that the incarnation is the means by which salvation has come, but they have different plot points that drive the stories for different reasons, right? It's in Matthew's story that we get the Magi, right? The Magi who visit foreigners and religious others who come to worship this king, this new king of the Jews, which is a title given to Jesus in Matthew at the beginning and then again at the end when he's crucified. We see all of the action in Matthew's story moving through Joseph, right? In the line of David. We see Herod, only in Matthew's story, who's doing what? Trying to kill this baby king of the Jews like a new Pharaoh. And so Jesus escapes the clutches of this Pharaoh into exile, into refugee status, to return to the land to liberate his people from this power. Matthew wants us to see Jesus as a new David and a new Moses, a new way of being a king. Luke's story has all the action moving through multiple people, but it sits with Mary, right? Matthew mentions Mary by name once. Luke has 3 women and 2 men, as if to balance out the power, just like in Mary's song, the part that we don't sing in church, right? There's no Magi in Luke's story. There's shepherds in the field, the poorest workers of the day. They are the expectant bringers of good news. And in Luke's story, we see the census, as if Luke is saying, hey, look at this dumb empire who has called all the people to move from where they're living to go somewhere else because that should be easier to count. I told the youth group this morning, this would be like if I wanted to know how many people were at youth group and I told them all, hey, go to your homes, go up to your homes, Simi Valley, Thousand Oaks, Moore Park, up on campus, and I'm going to go to every single house and count you so I know how many of you were here today. That's a horrible idea. But Luke is saying, look how dumb the empire is. And speaking of the empire, Luke gives Jesus specific titles that didn't originally belong to Jesus in that day. Caesar was Lord. Caesar was the Son of God. Caesar was Son of the Most High. Caesar showed up and said, hey, peace on earth through me. And Luke goes, no, Jesus is Lord. No, Jesus is Son of God. And no, peace does not come through sword and violence, but through a baby in a manger. Luke's story has the manger because the inn is full. But both of them drive home that salvation has come through the incarnation. I don't think we can read the biblical Christmas stories without acknowledging the world they were told in, that they came from, okay? That's why I bring up the differences. It's not to be like, oh, they're different stories, we can't trust them. No, we can trust them even more. Because the point was not for them to line up. The point was for us to see that we do not put our trust in the powers, the privileges, and the priorities of today. We don't put our trust in the Herods, the Caesars, the empires, right? We don't put our trust in ourselves. We put it in a baby where it doesn't make sense to put it. And we have to be honest that the way that we live sometimes is to play the role of Herod. It's to play the role of Caesar. It's to play the role of Rome. Ego, greed, a desire for selfishness above all, getting what we want, right? The OG version of the Grinch before the Who's rocked his heart. We play the role of empire. And to proclaim the Christmas story is to proclaim that that story is not true. That we are not supposed to be Herod or Rome or empire. We are not supposed to be the ones with the power. We put it in a different story. To trust these stories means to prepare room for the coming Christ child again and again and again. I think the Christmas stories offer up something similar to the parables that Jesus told, in that Jesus ends a lot of his parables by saying, go and do likewise. I think it'd be really cool if we could think about the Christmas stories with that at the end of them, right? What if the Christmas stories caused you to say, oh, go and do likewise? I should do like the people in these stories. The Magi ignoring the fear of the powerful, go and do likewise. The women being exalted and listened to, go and do likewise. The poor being made the expectant of good news, go and do likewise. And the birth of the Christ today, tomorrow, and every day after. Growing up, I did not grow up Church of Christ. I'm not a thoroughbred Church of Christer. Spoiler alert, neither are Fallon or Eric, and maybe Corrine as well. So that's at least 75% of your ministers are not thoroughbred Church of Christers, which is why Fallon and I can't sing a cappella well. We can sing it, it's just we lower the volume for all of you, right? But growing up, I heard a lot of times at Christmas that the point of Christmas was a moment in the year for you to invite Jesus into your heart. I don't know, maybe some of you have grown up with that. You say a prayer to invite Jesus into your heart. I don't think that's as common in Churches of Christ, which I actually appreciate. But maybe what we need to be asking for, praying for, seeking, is that God would rock our hearts a little bit like the Grinch this Christmas. That maybe we could let our hearts grow 3 sizes this Christmas. To make a little more room, a little more space, to make a little more opportunity for this Christ to show up. What if this Advent season, Jesus wants you to make some room? To recognize that today, tomorrow, every day after, this Christ child can be born. Since grad school, I've adopted a breath prayer for when life gets a little rough, when people get a little frustrating. And it's Christ in me, Christ in you, we are all in God. Because for me, I need a reminder, as common as my breathing, that it is in the Christ that all have their being, their movement, their purpose. It is in the Christ that all things are made. And so then that leads me to the question of who then is the Christ found in? Who can we see glimpses, moments of the incarnation within? Jesus tells us in the scripture that Henry read, the hungry, the thirsty, the stranger, the incarcerated, the sick, those without clothing, right? And the disciples are like, yeah, but Jesus, we never saw you like that. And Jesus says, well, when you did it for those that were the least of these, you did it for me. And likewise, when you didn't do it, you didn't do it for me. Right? I, growing up, heard that story, sheep and the goats, as the sheep are the ones who invited Jesus into their heart, and the goats were the ones who didn't. But Jesus tells his disciples, no, it's when you saw me and others and cared for them in that space. The Hebrew prophets tell us that it's in the poor, the widow, the oppressed, the orphan. Yes. And those 2 lists can kind of cover a lot of different people groups, right? But not everyone we interact with may fit into those groups. Right? Are we to believe that the Christ can only be found in specific spaces? Can the Christ only be found in Elkins Auditorium? I hope not. Unless we only see Jesus behind a lectern, which is, I guess, okay. Right? If the Christ can be born in a manger, if the Christ can be born in a barn, then where else? If the Christ is Lord, not Caesar, then where else can we see this Christ? That means today, right here, right now. Finals week for you students, where can you see the Christ? Christmas break for those of you going home, where can you see the Christ? In your families, where can you see the Christ? Historically, for the church, both the Church of Christ and the Universal Church, capital C, we don't have a great track record with seeing the Christ in others. Right? It doesn't take an extensive Google search to figure out the people and the places that we have deemed unworthy of finding the Christ within. And I think part of that is because we've condensed the Christmas story to a one-time-a-year event. Matthew and Luke squished together and said, this is where this one belongs. We put this story here and we move on. But I think the invitation of Advent is that Christ is continuing to show up. This might be a little risky, but I don't think Jesus came once as a baby and will only come again in the second coming. I think Christ continues to show up, and I think we continue to miss it. Because we are Herod, because we are Caesar, because we don't want any baby critiquing our desire for power, for ego, for wealth, for self-preservation. And I don't need to name everyone and everything in every group to make my point. We all know within ourselves the people, the places that many of us deem God to be absent. Right? We know groups we may ignore. We know people we may not want to be around. People we may despise or want to avoid. It includes your neighbors. It includes your enemies. And it most definitely includes you. Christ is here. And Advent invites us to allow our hearts to grow 3 sizes this day. Our hearts, our lives, all of us to grow 3 sizes to make more room for more people to recognize more of the Christ being born right here and right now. I already mentioned it, but the title of our kids' pageant is He has become like us so we could become like Him, right? ... And the Christ has become like us so that we could see the Christ in others. Probably should have put more dots after it too, because there's probably more to unpack. Every person has the opportunity to be the inn or the manger, full of stuff with no room, other than the stuff that we have to worry about. We're making space in uncomfortable and unpredicted spaces so that the Christ can be born. So that in our hearts and in our lives, we can anticipate the Christ to continue to arrive. In you, in me, in them. So, I told Eric I would keep this short because the children's pageant is way better than this. But may you find that this Advent season allows you to make room for the coming of the Christ child. May you find that your heart would grow 3 sizes this season. Would you find that you can make room in you and make room for others? And may grace and peace, love, joy, and hope be yours today, tomorrow, and every day after in the form of this coming Christ child. Amen.